Welcome to the Sacred Everywhere. I'm Dr. Sheri Kling, and in this space we explore how the sacred shows up in real life, in our questions, our struggles, our longing, and our hope. Can we find the sacred in every place and everyone? Let's see. Welcome to the Sacred Everywhere. I first want to apologize for being out of touch for a little bit. I was doing some traveling. I guess you might say I was experiencing the Sacred Everywhere as much as I could in both people and a particular place that I love to visit. I was traveling to the Asheville, North Carolina area to teach at the Hayden Institute's Summer Dream and Spirituality Conference. And that is an event that I try to go to every year. It's where I guess I would say my core tribe of people are. And so it's just always wonderful to reconnect with the people there who go to that conference, who I'm so fond of and so connected to, exploring topics that we all love to explore. I often refer to it as Jungian summer camp, but it's about dreams and inner work and consciousness and the cosmic story. Sometimes it's a really wonderful event, and I try to go every year. And it's held near Asheville, North Carolina, at the Cayuga Conference Center, which is also a very special and sacred place for me. That whole region of the country. For those of you who listen regularly, you may remember in my recent conversation with Jane Kennedy, I talked a little bit about feeling called to move to a particular home in Northeast Georgia, in the mountains there, and feeling a connection with the divine feminine there. And I would say in general that area is the home of my soul in terms of in earthly life anyway. And so it's always very special for me to return to that part of the country. And I miss it a lot. And I miss the people that I know there a lot. So I apologize again for being away a little bit, but I won't say who, but I do have some really exciting people lined up on my calendar to record over the next several weeks that I know you're going to enjoy. So please look for those recordings to come out as we go along and in this journey to the sacred everywhere, in the sacred everywhere, with the sacred everywhere. And so this week, I want to talk about sacred listening, asking, and healing. And one of the things that prompted my interest in exploring this topic with you all was that I listened to a video by a gentleman named Kyle Cease, and I really didn't know anything about him. He was on a channel called Next Level Soul, and I had never seen him before. And I guess he was a comedian earlier in his life and had some amazing experiences that now led him to be a spiritual teacher. And I really loved this video. It was called How Complaining Blocks Healing. And I won't get into all of what he talked about, but one of the key aspects of it was that he talked about how what we see outside ourselves often mirrors what's inside. And so he was talking about how when we're complaining, we're kind of connecting with an energy way of being in the world that kind of mirrors then our complaint. And there was a lot more to it than that. It was a great video. But I resonate a lot with the idea of what is outside mirroring what is inside. That connects really strongly to the way Carl Jung talked about both projection and synchronicity. And so, in synchronicity, which is meaningful coincidences, we find sometimes that outer events mirror what's happening inside of us, where we might experience, say, three different people mentioning a book within a week. And then we realize maybe it's really important for me to read that book, and we get it and we do read it. Synchronicities can come in all kinds of forms. but I believe really strongly that they're just how the sacred speaks to us. And the reason that, Jung talked about synchronicities as acausal, meaning he wasn't saying that our mind is causing the outer event to happen, but it is reflecting. And the reason that he felt that that could happen is because the whole entire cosmos is dripping with meaning. And that lines up really well also with what Alfred North Whitehead talked about in his philosophy of organism, where value and meaning are inherent in things themselves, not just uh, in our subjective internal experience. We aren't just putting meaning on things. Things are coming to us with meaning inherent in them. Now, maybe in another video, I'll get more into that and talk about maybe why that is. But here, I just want to just touch on synchronicity and also on the idea of projection, where Jung talked about that we will when our psyche is seeking to grow, seeking to integrate our own shadow material, that shadow material that is unknown to us, what it will do is kind of throw out and project outward the energies that we're trying to integrate inside of us. And so, for example, the great Western mystic Meister Eckhart said this. He said, when the soul wants to experience something, she throws out an image in front of her and then steps into it. And that's basically what Jung was talking about, that we project into the outer world what we are needing to integrate inside of us. We see that most often when people hook us, when people trigger us with something that really causes an immediate emotional reaction. And that trigger, the reason that's happening is that person is kind of hooking into an unhealed place in us. But there's a sense of projection too, that we are often wanting to say that's all about the outer person. Oh, that person is triggering me, or that person is evil, or that person is bad and causing me to feel this or that, or whatever, causing the circumstance to happen, when really what's happening is we are wanting to integrate a shadow piece of ourselves, and so we see it in that other person. A great example of this from a dream is something that I heard from uh, Bob Hoss, who I spoke with in an episode of The Sacred Everywhere several weeks ago. And I think we even talked about this example here, where he was working with a woman who kept having a recurring dream of her husband chasing her. And she was running and running and running. And I think he advised her, the next time she had that dream, to turn and face her husband rather and ask what he wanted. And so what she did was, when she turned and faced her pursuer, her husband's face dissolved and became her father's face. And she realized that she was projecting unresolved energies and issues with her father onto her husband. And we do that all the time. Um, I think now about Harville Hendricks, and I think it's called imago therapy, where he talks about that we will partner with the people who will hit our buttons because we're trying to heal our unresolved complexes and traumas. And we will connect more deeply with other people who can do that for us, who can bring up those unhealed energies so that we can see them outside of ourselves and then work with them and heal them. So that's just a little bit about projection. And so I'm thinking about that as I was listening to this Kyle Cease video on how complaining blocks healing. And so sometimes this idea of having an image that we need to step into, um, something like with that kind of energy happened with me while I was on this trip to the Hayden conference. And before I left, an author had sent me a book because he asked if I would write an endorsement for it. And it was a book on prayer. And so I received it in the mail just before I left. And so I thought, oh, I'll take this book with me and read it on my trip. It was not a very thick volume. So I thought, yeah, I can get through this and then I can write my endorsement. Awesome. So it was a book on prayer, and it'll be coming out soon. And I hope that maybe at that point when it's out, that I'll be able to have a conversation for the Sacred Everywhere with the author, whose name is Tom Heaton. So anyway, I'm reading this book on prayer, and I was staying with a friend of mine and commuting to the conference every day. And one night I was reading in the book, and he talks in this book a lot about the models of God that we have that can get in the way of faith and prayer. And as I was reading, I was really relating very strongly to many of to the whole book, but especially there were certain images of God that I recognized as being images that I struggle with myself. He talks in there about like the 911 God that we only call on when there's an emergency, or the janitor God that we call on to clean up our messes. And anyway, I don't remember the exact quote, but there was something that he wrote that really touched me in a place that I knew still needed healing. And so it brought up a lot of emotion. And something in me was moving. And as I was reflecting on what was moving in me, I realized what came up was an image of me being held in a circle of friends, held in love, held by touch, and I just felt this deep yearning. I am single. I don't have a partner. I don't have a romantic interest in my life right now. And so there are times when I feel very alone and where I feel like I'm having to do everything by myself, carrying a lot of burdens, a lot of stresses, as we all are. But sometimes can be worse than others. And right now, I had been feeling like I was carrying a lot, and I just felt like I needed that kind of connection to people that love me in a very physical way, because a lot of my friends are not where I live now. And so I can't connect with them that way. And and here I want to talk about a while back I participated in a program called Feminine Power. Claire Zammit is the founder of Feminine Power. It's an organization, and there was at that time she had offered a course, a 7-week course, and so I first signed up for that course and took the course and really loved it, and then later went on to do a longer term mentoring group, which was also a wonderful experience. And so in that course, she's talking about the differences between masculine power and feminine power, and how feminine power is more relational. Now, here we're not talking strictly about gender, because it's very Jungian to recognize this. All people, all humans carry both masculine and feminine energies. And in fact, the journey toward individuation, the journey toward wholeness, ultimately, ultimately results in the sacred marriage of the masculine and feminine energies in every person. So that is our path, that is our journey. But, often in the world, the ways that power has typically been used in the world have a certain kind of flavor. And when you're living within a patriarchal culture, that's a kind of a power that is power over. Um, and we often will see that. And there's nothing wrong with masculine power. It just has certain flavorings. And feminine power has different flavorings that often, as women, we don't recognize that we have a kind access to another kind of power. Now, at the Hayden conference, there was actually someone doing some work around comparing solar power and lunar power. And I loved that because it's a way to talk about masculine and feminine that doesn't get all wrapped up in the gender stuff. It's similar to the idea of yin and yang, which is, comes from Taoism, and that yin yang symbol where there's the two different kinds of energies that are always moving and flowing. And in fact, you might remember, there's the black side and then there's the white side. The black side has a white dot in it, and then the white side has a black dot in it, which is an indication that neither side is all just one thing. And we talk about that this is this tendency in Western culture to split apart these energies and to act as if mind can be separate from body, and fact can be separate from value, when all of that is an illusion. None of these things can be separated. So really, we live there's the sense that of dualism. There's this idea that we have these dualistic ways of thinking about things that separate the two, that bifurcate and split into these energies that are pairs of opposites that are necessary. What we forget often is that it's more like the poles of a magnet, where there's the north and south pole of the earth and also positive and negative poles of a magnet. You can't separate them. They are essential to each other, and they cannot be separated. Anyway, another diversion into a little bit about dualism. So I like this sense of solar power versus lunar power. Solar power is all about clarity and uh, action and initiative, and lunar power is more uh, about waiting, about receiving, about birthing, like the generativity of the womb. So we think about the darkness of the womb, and solar light versus lunar darkness. Anyway, there's a whole lot more to that. Maybe I'll do another video on that. But what Claire Zammit talked about in Feminine Power are that there are these ways of having power that are more relational and that have other aspects to them that we often forget are very, very powerful. And so one of the things she talked about in that course is that often when we struggle, can be behaving in the world in a way that exacerbates our struggle, unbeknownst to us, because again, this is our shadow. This is what is unknown to us about ourselves. And so, for example, and there's a whole bunch more than this, but this is the one that connected to this image that arose in me of the healing circle. And one of the things she talked about was that if we struggle with being alone and think that we're always doing everything alone and it's always on my shoulders, and I'm always alone, always doing things alone, and have no help, that often what we can be doing is actually isolating ourselves, mostly out of fear of rejection. And so we don't ask for help. We don't reach out to people around us. We assume that we just have to slog through and do everything by ourselves and on our own. And part of that too can be kind of an unwillingness to be vulnerable, to show that maybe we are struggling, that we have weakness in us. So there's this unwillingness to be vulnerable. And also maybe sometimes an unwillingness to sort of be on the hook, like to have to owe somebody something in return. And there's this sense of this transactional way of looking at relationship that keeps score, that keeps a record of, well, you helped me, so now I have to help you. And maybe what if I don't want to help you? Down, it's craziness. It's craziness. But it's a struggle that I think a lot of us deal with. And as a single person who's lived alone my whole life, I've been in relationships here and there, but honestly, I have been alone most of my life. Not because I wanted to be. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have children. I wanted all the things, right? But it didn't happen for me. And so I have been used to having to do everything on my own. And so it's been really hard for me to reach out and ask for help. It's really hard. And so this image comes to me as I'm reading this book on prayer about being held in a circle. And I had this feeling, I knew that I needed to ask for that circle while I was there in North Carolina at the Hayden Conference that I needed to do this there because that was where there was a lot of people that care about me that would be very willing to help. And I just, there was a moment of, like, oh gosh, do I really have to do this? But I knew I did. And that's the thing, when we are listening and honest with ourselves and know that we have to do a hard thing, this is when the healing comes, when we are willing to take that step and do the hard thing. And another thing that Kyle Cease talked about in his video was that when we move into these places of pain and fear, that we experience ego death, which is basically the shattering of the illusion of separation. And there's a kind of that's where the new birth emerges, is when we are willing to allow the illusions, to allow the old lie to drop. And so when I thought about asking for this help, asking for this circle, I was mortified. I was literally mortified to ask. But I did. And I approached one of my women friends who's part of this group, and I told her what I needed. And I'm telling you, it was not easy. I was crying a lot. I was releasing a lot of emotion. But I asked for what I needed. I said, I just feel like I need a circle of people around me, physically around me. And I told her this story of how years ago when I was in training to work with an organization called Executive Adventure that did outdoor team building events, not like outward bound dangerous things, but things that anybody could basically do. And I was in the training for that. And we did both a trust fall and a trust circle. So in the trust fall, you climb up a few steps. The people are lined up parallel to where you're standing. You turn your back, close your eyes, and fall into their arms. And so I did that, which was huge. And then the trust circle is basically when you're standing in the middle of a circle again. I think you're blindfolded. You have your arms crossed across your chest, and you allow yourself to be moved around the circle where your feet are staying kind of planted in the center. The circle is around you, and they take you by the shoulders and pass you around so that you are just leaning like one of those dolls that used to bobble, bobble at the base. And you're kind of being just, passed around with your eyes closed, blindfolded, and you just have to trust that people are not going to drop you on the ground. And at the end of that exercise, as a group, we debriefed what that was like. And I remember there was another woman in the group who said at the end of this, she's like, oh my God, I just felt like I was being smothered. Like people were so close and I just couldn't stand it. And I said, oh my God, I felt like people were so far away. And I just, needed people to be closer to me than I felt like they were. It was the exact same circle. We were the exact same distance apart. But this is an indication of who I am, of what has always been in my heart. It's always been this struggle of feeling like people aren't close enough to me in a physical way. And so, anyway, I asked for this help. I asked for this circle. And so my friend Megan said, let me see what I can do. And so later in the week, a couple nights later, we had a special event that she led in the evening out under the almost full moon in the labyrinth. It was a labyrinth dance. It was a wonderful experience. And two other people who I know really well and love, two other women named Carrie and Christy, stayed behind after the labyrinth dance. And so there were four of us. And we went into the center of the labyrinth. And I shared with them what I needed, and cried and said, I just feel like everyone is so far from me and I'm having a hard time and I need to feel people close to me. And they surrounded me and they held me in a loving embrace. And they prayed over me and they recited poetry over me and they laughed with me and cried with me. And it was beautiful. It was it was really, really beautiful. And by the time I left there, it was about 11 o'clock at night. And, I was commuting. So I had to get in my car and drive back to my friend's house, which wasn't far. So it wasn't a far drive. And when I drove out of Cayuga, on Cayuga Lake Road, which then intersects in a T at Cayuga Road, and I had to stop there at the T and turn right. When I stopped there in my car, there was a sign right across from me that I had not noticed before. It could have been there all week. It was a printed sign. It wasn't a handwritten sign. It was a printed sign, a little yard sign. And it said, "It's okay to ask for help." Yeah, it said that. It's okay to ask for help. That is a synchronicity. That is a perfect example of an amazing synchronicity. Now, I share that not to like, oh, here's what wonderful thing happened to me. Well, aren't I wonderful? This is something that happens to all of us. We all are tapped in directly to a world that is dripping with meaning and value and purpose. And it will reflect that to us. But we have to have the eyes to see it. If we don't look, if we don't acknowledge, if we don't acknowledge that butterfly that shows up at the funeral of your mother, if we don't acknowledge the other signs in the outer world that connect with our inner world, we'll miss them. We'll miss them and we'll miss the frequency with which they happen. They happen all the time. And so I want to talk again here about the listening because this video is all about sacred listening, asking, and healing. And one of the things that Kyle said in his video was that we have these lies that are held in our bodies. They are held from trauma, from life experience, from ways in which we have been wounded, and we hold that tension, we hold those energies in our bodies. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, tells exactly about how that happens and how trauma changes our brains and our nervous systems. But the good news is our brains and our nervous systems have neuroplasticity where they can reconnections, new connections can be made. We can move out of these traumatic complexes where we have knee-jerk reactions to the world that are the same over and over again and just cause us pain. So he talked about the lies that are held in our bodies, the stories of separation that we tell ourselves. But the alchemy comes. Alchemy is the idea of turning lead into gold. And of course, there were those who wrote about that back in the Middle Ages. And maybe in some respects, they were actually trying to turn lead into gold. But Carl Jung and all the others thought that they were actually talking about the mystical journey of transformation of the soul, and that they were writing about how to alchemize the lead that weighs the soul down into gold. And so Kyle Cease talks about that the alchemy for us today is to listen for what hurts. And then I would add, I can't remember if he said this or if I'm just adding this, but what we need to do is allow what hurts to give us an image, to give us an image that we can then move into. Just like Meister Eckhart said, when the soul wants to experience something, she throws out an image in front of her and then steps into it. When I was reading that book on prayer, the image came to me of a circle of being held, a circle of friends holding me. And I moved into that image, I didn't just I didn't just feel it, see it in my mind, and then move away from it. I didn't just think about it and write about it in my journal, though I did that, which is another wonderful way to work with this inner material. But I made it real. I moved into it in the outer world. I asked for that. I asked for it. And so when we move into the image, we feel the feelings that we have. We feel the emotions that come with that image. And then if we need it, we can ask for help. One of my friends, who's a Jungian analyst, suggested to me that my asking for that circle was a radical act of self-love. And he's right. It was. It was the displaying the willingness to be vulnerable, to open myself to possible rejection. I mean, could could my friends have said, "Gosh, we really can't do that this week. We don't have time." Sure, they could have. But I knew that I had to ask, and I had that willingness, even though it mortified me. It mortified me. I can't tell you enough about how much it mortified me. So my asking, my being vulnerable was an ego death. It was an ego death of that illusion of separation. And I trusted on the love that I knew would be there. I trusted in that. And I also realized later that that ask was also a declaration that my needs are valid, that my needs are valid, that I am worthy of having a demonstration of love from my friends. And you are worthy of that. And so if you find yourself, like me, isolating, if you find yourself yearning for connection, then I would just encourage you to reach out. Reach out to somebody you know. Don't don't turn that off and move away from it. Let the image arise of what you need. And you know, it might just be enough to connect with the natural world. It might just be enough. If you don't have a friend that you can reach out to right now, then it might just be enough to sit under a tree when you acknowledge that tree as a sacred presence. Sit and listen to the birds. Sit and stick your feet in a puddle or in a pond or in a lake. Sit in the grass. Talk to the ducks. Here in Florida, I talk to the ducks all the time. I talk to the lizards all the time. I talk to the birds all the time. Do that, please. Don't be alone. Don't be alone. Don't think you are alone, because ultimately we are never alone. And believe me when I say this is a lesson I'm still trying to learn. Everything that I teach and write about comes out of my own journey to try to recognize that I'm never alone, that I belong to and in this world, that I matter, and that I can experience the positive change that comes when I'm willing to be open to that transformation. And the same is true for all of us. So I wish you in this next week a beautiful journey of listening, of sacred asking, and of sacred healing. Thanks. Thanks for being part of this journey. If these conversations matter to you, your membership helps make them possible. Until next time, may you notice the sacred